This title calls for Style A because its emotional promise is immediate, possessive physical control, wrapped in jealousy, so quiet it feels more dangerous than a shout. The silver lighter clicked once in the dark. "Sit down," the Mafia boss said softly, like the floor itself would obey him if I didn't. "Or I'll carry you there myself, little thorn." Elena Belandi was supposed to deliver perfume to a charity gala and leave before midnight. She was not supposed to bleed on the polished marble of Dante Salvator's palazzo. She was not supposed to notice the calm in his voice more than the threat in it. And she was definitely not supposed to look at another man while Dante was watching. In 2 minutes, a donor would touch her wrist like he owned the right. In 2 hours, Dante Salvator would close the gates behind her. The secret she carried wasn't in her bag. It was stitched into a dead man's notebook and hidden in the way her family made scent. If it surfaced, it would either save his empire or burn it down with both of them inside. The title promised an Italian mafia world with a controlled, jealous boss and an innocent woman whose defiance is instinctive rather than theatrical. The core dynamic is forced proximity sharpened by possessiveness, but what makes it specific is the quietness of his warning. This is not a man who needs volume to dominate a room, and not a story where her innocence disappears to survive him. It is dangerous, intimate, and slow-burning, with tenderness hidden inside threat. The hero is Dante Salvator. The heroine is Elena Belandi. His wound is the death of his younger sister, Giulia. In a warehouse fire caused by the very corruption inside his family, he never managed to stop in time. Her wound is softer and no less shaping. She was raised by a father who taught her to find truth in scent, then lost him in an accident that never made emotional sense. The fresh turns are these. Her skill is scent archiving and perfumery, which becomes a weapon, a code, and a form of emotional confession. The villain is Dante's own uncle and consigliere, the man who taught him power and shows him what love-starved control becomes when it hardens into doctrine. And the choice to stay with Dante is not forced by captivity, but made in the open, after she is given a real way out. The reason he fixates on her is not beauty. In the first scene, when one of his men is bleeding, Elena kneels and presses her scarf to the wound before she even looks at Dante. No flattery. No fear performance. She sees pain before power, and no one in his world has ever done that. The sensory motif is the click and blue flame of Dante's silver lighter. His name for her is Little Thorn. The comedy relief character is Gianni Ferrero, Dante's driver and security aide, a handsome disaster who is forever on a new diet he cannot keep and helplessly in love with Bianca Conti. The housekeeper who threatens him with a wooden spoon and feeds him anyway. The first thing I noticed about Dante Salvator was not his face. It was the sound. A silver lighter clicked open somewhere beyond the carved walnut doors, crisp and metallic, the kind of small sound that made every other sound in the room seem badly behaved. I had come to Palazzo Salvator with 6 boxed perfume vials from the Belandi workshop and strict instructions from Signora Loretti to place them on the donor tables, smile if spoken to, and be gone before the real guests arrived. "Do not wander," she had said, which would have been easier advice to follow if the man at the end of the corridor had not made the air feel like a held breath. The doors were open, just enough for me to see into the receiving hall. Men in dark suits stood beneath a frescoed ceiling, all of them still in the unnatural way armed men are still, like movement exists but has been postponed. In the center of them stood a man with one hand in his pocket and the other holding the lighter. Blue flame, silver case, extinguished, click, open again, Dante Salvator. I knew his name the way people in Milan know the weather before it breaks. You feel it moving through other people first. A younger man was on his knees in front of him, lips split, blood marking the white marble in bright, unreasonable drops. He had tried, I learned later, to steal guest information and sell it to a rival. At the time, I only knew that he was swaying, and another man beside him, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, a scar under one eye, had a knife slice across his palm from taking the fool down. The broad-shouldered man barely looked at his hand. No one else looked at it either. They were all looking at Dante. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe habit. Maybe my father had spent too many years teaching me that pain ignored becomes pain multiplied. I set the perfume case on a side table, crossed the threshold I had absolutely not been invited to cross, and took the linen scarf from my throat. "Hold still," I said to the bleeding man with the scar. "You're making it worse." The room changed, not loudly, just completely. I knelt in front of the injured hand and wrapped the scarf around it, pulling tight. Warm blood soaked through almost at once. Only then did I feel it, that attention, heavy and exact. I looked up. Dante Salvator had lowered the lighter. He was taller than I expected. Not because men like him were always described as tall, but because some people seem to occupy vertical space differently, as if the room had agreed to arrange itself around them. Dark suit, dark tie. Face too composed to be called handsome safely. His gaze moved from my bloodied fingers to my face with no visible confusion, which was somehow more frightening than if he had barked. "Name," he said. "Elena Belandi." The scarred man, later I would know him as Marco De Luca, his cousin and head of security, let out a rough laugh through his teeth. "She's bossy. Your hand is split open," I said. "That's not the moment for personality." Something shifted in Marco's expression. Something like surprise, something very close to amusement. Dante closed the lighter with a click. "Get De Luca stitched." Two men moved instantly. The thief was dragged away. No speeches, no display. The terrible thing about him, I understood even then, was efficiency. Violence in him did not feel hot. It felt filed, labeled, and shelved. I should have left. I knew that. Instead, I wiped my fingers on the ruined scarf and remembered the perfume case. "I was told to set the donor gifts in the ballroom." "You were told not to wander," an older woman beside the door murmured. She wore black, silver hair pinned at the nape. Housekeeper, I guessed. "I didn't wander," I said. "There was blood." Marco laughed outright. I didn't see Dante smile, but something in his mouth thought about it and changed its mind. By the time I finished arranging the crystal vials under their place cards, my hands had stopped shaking. Barely. Orange blossom for the mayor's wife. Vetiver and cedar for a banker who liked to believe he was serious. Lemon leaf and bergamot at the centerpieces, because rich people always wanted freshness near money, as if one could bless the other. I told myself I had imagined him watching me from the doorway. Then Luca Ventresca arrived at my elbow. He was a donor's son with the sort of expensive face that assumed itself welcome. "You made these. I helped prepare them." He lifted one of the vials, sniffed, and smiled too close. "And which scent are you wearing?" I stepped back, but the hem of my dress caught on the leg of a chair. The tray in my hand tilted. Glass shattered against marble. Pain flashed sharp and bright through the sole of my foot. I made an ugly little sound and then hated myself for it. "It's nothing," I said, because that was what women say while bleeding in rooms full of men who have already decided what they're allowed to be. I bent instinctively to save what I could. A hand closed around my wrist before my fingers reached the floor. Not hard. That was almost worse. "Sit down before I carry you myself," Dante Salvator said quietly. The whole room seemed to hear him. His gaze flicked once to Ventresca, whose hand dropped from the back of my chair so fast it was practically a confession. Then Dante looked at me again. Lower. To the blood marking my heel. "Now, little thorn," I should have argued. Instead, my knees folded under the weight of his tone. He crouched in front of me on the marble, as if men like him did that every day, picked a clean linen napkin from the nearest table, and wrapped my foot with precise fingers. I could smell his cologne then, dark cedar over cold night air, and beneath it, impossibly, the faint metallic trace of lighter fluid. "You collect sharp things badly," he said. I was trying to save the vials. I noticed. His thumb pressed just above my ankle to still me, not rough, not gentle either, controlled. Everything about him was controlled. When he stood, the lighter clicked once in his hand. "You're not going home tonight," he said, and with that, one door in my life shut behind me so cleanly I could hear the lock. I woke in a room larger than my entire apartment. For a disorienting second, I thought I had died, and some very expensive version of the afterlife had taken me by mistake. Then I saw my dress hanging from a wardrobe door, my ruined shoe on a velvet bench, and the narrow strip of dried blood still under my thumbnail. Not dead, just contained. The guest wing of Palazzo Salvator smelled like beeswax, old stone, and coffee somewhere too far away to help me. Morning light lay in pale bars across the floor. My foot had been cleaned and bandaged properly in the night. Someone had placed a tray beside the bed with tea, toast, and 2 white tablets. I stared at the tablets as if they might confess something under pressure. A knock came before I could decide whether drugging a hostage gently was still drugging a hostage. The silver-haired woman from the hall entered carrying a folded robe over one arm. "Bianca Conti," she said. "I keep this house standing." "I'm Elena Belandi," I said, then winced. Obviously, her mouth twitched. "You may call me Bianca." "Everyone does except men who are afraid of me." "Are there many?" "All the intelligent ones." She set the robe down, adjusted the tea tray I had not touched, and looked at me in the quiet, assessing way older women do, when they've already survived enough to recognize a problem on sight. "The tablets are for pain, not poison. If Signor Salvator wanted you dead, breakfast would not be involved. That is not as reassuring as you think. It isn't meant to be reassuring. It is meant to be accurate." After she left, I took one tablet out of spite and the other because my foot hurt. By the time I was dressed, anger had warmed me enough to walk on it. I found the corridor by following the smell of coffee and warm bread. The palazzo in daylight was worse somehow, less dreamlike, more deliberate. Marble, ironwork, antique saints staring down from niches as if they had opinions about organized crime and simply lacked the energy to interfere. The kitchen was alive with controlled chaos. Pans. Steam, an espresso machine hissing like an insult. Bianca stood at the center of it with a wooden spoon like a queen with a scepter. At the counter sat a man in a black suit eating plain egg whites from a bowl with the expression of someone performing a burial rite. He looked up when I entered. "You're the blood girl. I have a real name. So do I, but my suffering is more interesting." He rose and pressed a hand theatrically to his chest. "Gianni Ferrero. Driver, security, occasional miracle worker. Current victim of carbohydrates being withheld by a cruel universe." Bianca smacked the back of his head lightly with the spoon. "I'm keeping him alive," she said to me, "against his better judgment." Gianni lowered his voice conspiratorially. "I told her I'm doing clean eating." "You told me that with powdered sugar on your jacket," Bianca said. He sighed the sigh of men too pretty to have developed practical defenses. "A man makes one mistake with a bombalone, and suddenly no one respects his discipline." Despite myself, I laughed. The sound felt almost illegal in that kitchen. Gianni noticed and softened. There was kindness in him under the performance, quick and bright. It made the room easier to stand in. Then the room went silent. No announcement, no clearing of throats. Just silence arriving before him. I turned. Dante stood in the doorway, jacket on, tie gone, dark shirt open at the throat by one button. He wasn't looking at Bianca or Gianni. He was looking at the untouched second plate Bianca had set at the far end of the island, as if he had known exactly where I would come if I wanted answers and coffee. "I'd like to go home," I said. "Good morning to you too," Gianni muttered, then drained his black coffee like it had personally offended him and retreated toward the side door. "Bianca, if I die without bread, tell my mother I went heroically." "You'll die whining," Bianca said. Dante crossed to the island. "Sit." It was not the same line as the night before, but my body reacted to it anyway. I hated that. "I'm not staying here because you say so." His gaze dropped briefly to my bandaged foot, then lifted again. "At the moment, yes." "You are. Why?" "Because men outside my gates know your name." I felt the answer more than understood it. Cold moved through me in thin, careful threads. From a charity gala, from your brother. I went very still. Leo. I had not seen him in 3 days, which was not yet enough to be panic because Leo had always been gifted at making irresponsibility sound temporary. But 3 days had weight now. Too much. What about my brother? He owes money to people who collect in blood when cash is unavailable. That doesn't involve me. In his mind, it does. I opened my mouth and closed it again. The kitchen smelled suddenly too sweet, too sharp. Coffee and orange peel and the faint medicinal sting of my own fear. Dante set a small leather envelope on the counter between us. Inside were 2 photographs. Leo outside a gaming club. Leo getting into a car with men I did not know and did not want to. He tried to sell something he shouldn't have had, Dante said. Your father's notebook. My throat tightened. My father's formulas are mine. Apparently not to everyone. I stared at the photographs until the room blurred at the edges. So what are your rules? There. A surrender small enough to pretend it was. He answered without triumph. You stay inside the estate unless I approve otherwise. You tell Bianca or me before you move from one wing to another. You do not answer calls from unrecognized numbers. If I assign you an escort, you keep them. I looked up sharply. I'm not a prisoner. No. His voice was calm enough to be cruel. Prisoners are kept for punishment. You're being kept alive. It should have made me angrier than it did. Maybe because somewhere under the anger was the memory of his hand steady at my ankle. Maybe because I didn't know yet which part of him was more dangerous. The part that could order men dragged away, or the part that wrapped linen around a wound like he couldn't bear waste. I still want to leave, I said. I know. And if I try, his eyes rested on me for 1 beat too long. They'll bring you back. Then he took the lighter from his pocket, clicked it once and walked out, leaving the smell of cold cedar and command behind him. My coffee had gone untouched. So had I. For the moment, by the 3rd day, I knew the sounds of the palazzo well enough to tell what sort of danger lived in each one. Bootsteps meant movement. Low male voices meant plans. Silence meant Dante. He sent for me just after noon. Marco De Luca met me outside the west corridor with his hand newly stitched and my scarf, washed, ironed, folded into an impossible square. You started a tradition, he said, handing it back. No one has ever lectured me while I was bleeding before. I wasn't lecturing. I was helping. In this house that counts as a form of rebellion. There was warmth in him now, though his face still looked built for suspicion. He led me downstairs by a private stairwell the guests of respectable families were probably not shown. The air cooled as we descended. The smell changed too, dust, metal, paper, stone. Not the theatrical luxury of the main rooms, the engine beneath it. At the bottom, Dante waited outside a locked iron door. He opened it himself. The room beyond was long and windowless, lined with shelves of ledgers, boxes, and flat archival cases. On the center table lay a leather notebook so familiar my heart reacted before my mind did. Brown calfskin, worn corner. My father's stitching along the spine where it had once split, and he refused to replace it because repair carries history better than replacement. I crossed the room without permission. You found it. We recovered it, Dante said. My fingers trembled as I opened the cover, Matteo Bellandi. Even the slant of his hand on the inside page felt like an intimacy I hadn't earned the right to survive. My father had been a scent maker, archivist, and patient teacher of impossible things. He taught me to smell rain in stone, saffron in old gloves, grief in clothes packed too quickly after funerals. He also told me, with maddening firmness, that some clients were never to be discussed and some commissions were about discretion, not perfume. I had thought that meant affairs, not this. The notebook pages were formula entries at first glance: bergamot, narrowly, labdanum, alcohol ratios, maturation times. But the margins held numbers, dates, tiny marks beside ingredient names. It's a cipher, I said before I realized I was saying it aloud. Dante watched me. Explain. My father hid information in sense structures when he wanted records to look harmless. The top notes mean one thing, the base another. Ratios can indicate quantities or roots. I swallowed. I didn't know he was still doing this. For my father, Dante said. The admission landed between us like a clean blade. I looked up. My father worked for your family? Sometimes. That's not an answer. It's the one you get today. Anger rose hot and quick, but curiosity was quicker. I bent over the notebook, forcing myself to read it as he would have taught me. Bitter orange where it should have been sweet. Cedar marked twice. A clove notation in the wrong hand on page 23. Someone added to this later, I said. Marco shifted behind me. Can you read it? Not all at once. I touched the clove mark. But this section isn't perfume, it's inventory. And this, I turned 2 pages. This is a meeting schedule disguised as curring times. Dante moved closer. Not enough to touch, enough to change the air. What else? I breathed in over the paper, a ridiculous instinct until it was. Old ink, leather, a trace of oil on the page edges, faint but distinct. Blue cypress, I said. No. Blue cypress mixed with benzoin resin. I looked at him. That's not my father's preservative blend. What is it? A modern fixative, more expensive. Someone handled this recently after wearing it. It clings, Marco whistled low. You can smell that. Yes, Madonna. Dante did not whistle. Of course he didn't, but his gaze sharpened with something that felt worse than surprise. Assessment, maybe, or interest choosing a shape. Can you identify who wears it? Not from a room full of aftershave and liars. But if I smelled it again, probably. His mouth moved almost imperceptibly. Useful. I should have been offended. Instead, I was absurdly conscious of how near his sleeve was to my hand. Dark fabric. Stillness, heat I could feel without contact. The phone in Marco's pocket buzzed. He checked it, face hardening. One of the commode trucks got hit. Dante was already turning toward the door. Inside leak or outside? Too clean for outside. A traitor, then, or something close enough to feel the same. He paused once, hand on the iron door, and looked back at me. Stay with the notebook. Write down everything you see. I want the truth about my father. You'll get it, he said. It was not a promise. It was an order given the shape of one. When they left, the room seemed to exhale. But not before I saw one thing I don't think Dante meant me to see. As he slipped the silver lighter back into his pocket, his fingers hesitated over it for half a second, almost reverent. Like the object hurt. Dante's thoughts, brief and unspoken, would have changed everything for me in that moment. He recognized Matteo Bellandi's stitching, because he had stood in smoke at 19 holding Giulia's scarf, while Matteo tried and failed to pull her from fire. He knew Alina's father had died for refusing to keep certain secrets. He knew, before Alina did, that the notebook had become a death sentence the day her brother touched it. I only knew the room had grown colder, and that somewhere above me, someone inside his empire had started moving first. The private chapel sat at the back of the estate like an apology no one had finished making. Bianca took me there on Sunday because, in her words, when men start lying badly, I prefer God as company. She carried flowers cut from the winter garden. I carried my father's notebook wrapped in cloth because I did not trust leaving it anywhere I couldn't see. The chapel was small, stone-walled, candlelit even by day. It smelled of wax, cold incense, and old prayers that had learned not to expect answers quickly. I used to come here with my husband, Bianca said, arranging white roses before the Madonna. Now I come to complain professionally. Does it help? No, but it keeps me from poisoning certain men with soup. I smiled despite myself. Then Dante walked in. He did not belong to candlelight and yet somehow overpowered it. The suit today was charcoal, no tie again. Rain darkened the shoulders of his coat, and for one ridiculous second, I thought not about danger or lies, but about how wet wool made a man look more human than money ever could. Bianca glanced between us with the look of a woman who had raised 3 sons and feared none of them. I'll light the candles outside, she said, and left without waiting for either of us to object. I stood by the second pew, notebook tucked close to my ribs. You put guards at a chapel. I put guards anywhere you stand. The reply landed too quickly to be considered flirtation and too carefully to be casual. I looked away first. I decoded more pages, I said. The ledger includes ports, shell companies, quantities. Someone used my father's formulas to hide shipments for years. Dante moved to the first pew but did not sit. What kind of shipments? I can't prove all of it, but some are not perfume ingredients. I hesitated. And one code repeats beside a warehouse district address. His expression changed by such a small degree another person might have missed it. I didn't. Not after days of studying his silences the way other women might study affection. You know that address, I said. Yes, I waited. He did not elaborate. The bells rang then, one heavy strike then another. Dante went perfectly still, not tense, worse. Absent for a fraction of a second, like some internal door had blown open and slammed again so fast only the draft remained. His gaze fixed not on me but past me, past the altar on memory. What happened there? I asked quietly. His eyes came back. Nothing you need. That's not true. No, he looked at the candles. It is. Rain began outside, sudden and hard against the chapel windows. Bianca called from the threshold that she would fetch umbrellas from the house. Before either of us could move, a shot cracked somewhere beyond the hedge wall. Instinct shoved me lower before reason arrived. Dante was already in front of me. That was the first thing. Not the gun in his hand, not Marco's shout outside, not the second shot taking a chunk from the chapel door frame. Dante stepped in front of me so fast it felt premeditated by his bones. Stay down, he said. I hated how safe his voice made panic feel. Another shot, splintering wood. He crossed the space to me, caught the back of my neck with one broad hand, and lowered me behind the stone pew. His palm was warm, steady. The kind of steady that made your own fear seem embarrassing. Outside, men shouted in Italian, fast, sharp, running footsteps over wet stone. Inside, he crouched in front of me with a gun in one hand and his body making a wall of the other. Rainwater darkened his cuff. A thin white scar disappeared beneath his watch strap and up his wrist like an old fault line. Who are they? I whispered. Cowards. I should not have almost smiled then. I know that. But terror does strange things when it collides with a man who sounds annoyed by bullets. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it began. Marco's voice came from outside. Clear. Dante didn't move immediately. He listened first, counted the silence, chose belief only after the world earned it. When he stood, he offered me a hand. I took it. My knees had gone watery without consulting me. We crossed the wet threshold together, and I slipped on the rain-slick stone. His hand shot to my ankle as I lurched. A bare inch of skin between dress hem and heel. His fingers closed there. Warm, firm, not intimate by intention maybe, but my body did not care what his intention was. It reacted before I could think, a bright, startled wire running up through me. He felt it. I knew he felt it because his hand tightened once and then loosened as if letting go took discipline. Easy, he said. Gianni appeared at the bottom of the steps drenched, holding 2 umbrellas and 1 paper bag. I bring weather protection and protein crackers, he announced breathlessly. One of these things no one here respects. Marco looked at the paper bag. You came to a shooting with snacks. Gianni lifted his chin. Trauma lowers blood sugar. Bianca smacked his arm with the umbrella. Idiot, he winced. Bianca, if I die today, tell everyone I was brave. If you die today, she said, it will be because you keep saying foolish things in front of armed men. Dante let go of my ankle. But the place where his hand had been did not return to ordinary. Not after that. Not ever again. The first time I lied to Dante, I felt it in my throat before I heard it in my voice. Leo called just after midnight from an unknown number. I was in the workroom. Bianca had reluctantly surrendered to me. A former morning salon with tall windows and terrible lighting, now crowded with blotter strips, tincture bottles, my father's notebook. And the stubborn hope, that if I solved enough of his codes, I could make sense of why he had ever walked near men like the Salvator family. The room smelled of citrus peels, alcohol, iris root, and exhaustion. When the phone vibrated, I stared at it until it stopped. Then it rang again. "Elena!" Leo sounded breathless. "Wrong." "Don't hang up. Where are you?" "I can't say." "You absolutely can." A broken laugh. "Still you." My hand shook so badly I had to set the pipette down. "Leo, what did you do?" "Not what they told you." Which was not a denial. Siblings learn the shape of evasion before they can spell it. He swallowed audibly. "I took pages from Papa's book." I thought I could sell copies and get clear. I didn't understand what I had. Now everybody wants the rest. "Who is everybody?" A pause, too long. "Elena, if they ask, don't tell Salvator you heard from me." My chest tightened. "Why?" "Because one of his men is feeding them." The line went dead. I sat there with the phone against my ear and listened to nothing until Bianca knocked and entered carrying tea. One look at my face, and she set the tray down without a word. "You're pale," she said. "What happened?" "Nothing." She gave me the kind of look only women over 50 can give with full legal force. "Not nothing," I amended. "Will you tell him?" I turned the phone face down on the work table. "Not yet." That was the lie. Because when Dante came an hour later, drawn perhaps by the light under the door or some private instinct that kept him moving toward whatever threatened order, I told him only that I had made progress with the ledger. He stood across from the work table while rain traced the windows in soft, crooked lines. "Show me." I passed him the page I had decoded, several shipping routes, a meeting address, a sequence of ingredient names that mapped to account transfers. He scanned it with quick, exact eyes. "This line doesn't fit," I said, pointing lower. "Orange blossom, smoked tea, black resin." "It looks like a formula, but the ratios are wrong for perfume." "What is it for?" "I don't know yet." He set the page down and his sleeve brushed mine. The contact was light, accidental. It felt like a confession anyway. "I built a trial accord," I said, partly because silence had become dangerous in his presence. "From the hidden line." "Why?" "Because scent reveals intent." I crossed to the blotter rack, picked up a strip and held it out. "Smell." He stepped closer, took the strip. His fingers were careful not to touch mine. Almost. The air between our hands seemed to notice. He lifted the strip once. His expression did not change, but his voice lowered by half a shade. "Orange blossom. At the top, then smoke, then amber so dark it almost turns bitter." I hesitated. "It starts soft and ends like something burned." He looked at the row of bottles on the table. "And that means?" "It means my father was describing a person or hiding one inside a formula." I picked up the small test vial, suddenly embarrassed by how naked the thing was. "The structure is deceptive. Bright first, damage underneath." His gaze moved from the vial to me, slow enough to make my skin aware of itself. "What did you call it?" I hadn't meant to answer honestly, but I did. "Second skin." For one brief second, something in his face loosened. Not enough for a smile, enough for a human trace. The phone on the table lit again. "Leo." Dante saw the screen. The room changed, not violently, more quietly than that. His attention sharpened until it was almost visible. "You said nothing happened," he said. I could have lied again. Instead, I stood there with my pulse hammering in my throat and watched the trust I had not realized mattered begin to thin between us. "He said one of your men is feeding information out," I whispered. Dante did not touch the phone. "And you chose not to tell me. He's my brother, and I'm the man trying to keep you alive." The words should have felt arrogant. They didn't. They felt tired, which was worse. "I didn't know if it was a trap." His eyes stayed on mine. "Everything is a trap now." Then he reached past me for the blotter strip, his hand stopping a breath from my wrist before withdrawing. Another almost, another thing that hurt without contact. "Pack a bag," he said. "We leave for the lake safe house in 20 minutes. "Why?" "Because if there's a leak inside my house, I don't intend to offer you to it gift-wrapped. And Leo," his jaw tightened once. "If your brother is alive, I'll find him." He turned at the door, the silver lighter already in his hand. Then he clicked it open and said the thing I would replay for days afterward, trying to decide whether it belonged to anger or something far more dangerous. "Don't make me regret trusting you, little thorn." He left before I could answer. Outside my window, the rain kept falling. Inside, betrayal had started to breathe. The safe house on Lake Como was quieter than the palazzo and somehow more frightening for it. No staff bustle, no polished performance of wealth. Just stone walls, dark water beyond the windows, and a silence so complete I could hear the old house settling around us. Marco stayed outside with 2 men. Gianni prowled the perimeter complaining about the absence of proper gym equipment in remote properties. Bianca had refused to come and sent enough food for a wedding. Inside, Dante and I moved around each other like people carrying lit matches through dry grass. He took calls in the study. I worked at the kitchen table with the notebook, my trial accord, and the growing certainty that the coded line beneath orange blossom and smoke was not about shipments at all. It was about the warehouse fire that killed Giulia Salvator. My father had hidden names inside the formula, not clients, witnesses. I was uncapping the black resin bottle when the first shot cracked through the window. Glass exploded across the sink. Dante was in the doorway before my scream finished leaving me. Down, I was already moving, but not fast enough. A second shot shattered the cabinet above my head. Dante reached me in 2 strides, caught my waist, and took me to the floor with the force of a man who had calculated impact before fear arrived. His body covered mine. Heavy, warm. Alive in a way that made terror blur around the edges. Outside, chaos ripped open. Marco shouting, tires on gravel, gunfire chewing the night. Dante lifted just enough to look at me. "Are you hit?" I shook my head. He moved off me and fired twice through the broken window without even glancing. Someone screamed outside. He didn't react. That was when I saw blood spreading low across his shirt. "You're shot. It missed anything expensive. Dante, stay here." He started for the back door. I grabbed his wrist. I don't know if the gesture shocked him or me more. He looked down at my hand around his pulse, then at my face. The whole world seemed to narrow to that single point of contact. "You are bleeding," I said, because apparently when my soul left my body it delegated to practicality. For one endless second, he almost bent toward me. Almost said something I couldn't have survived hearing then. Instead he pulled free, went out into the gunfire, and became exactly what his world had made him. It lasted 6 minutes. I know because the kitchen clock above the stove kept ticking. Ruthless, domestic, stupidly calm. When he came back in, there was blood on his hands that wasn't all his. His expression had gone cold in the way deep water goes black at night. "Marco," I asked. "Alive? Gianni? Talking, so unfortunately alive." I should not have laughed, but I did. It came out broken. Dante swayed once, barely perceptible. That decided it. "Sit down." His brow moved a fraction. "You heard me," I said, already pulling the first aid tin from the lower cupboard. "Sit down before I—" My voice caught on the echo of his own words. "Please." He looked at me for a long moment and then lowered himself into the kitchen chair by the table. Not because I had power over him, because the room had emptied enough for pain to demand attention. I cut his shirt open at the side. The bullet had furrowed flesh along his ribs, ugly and deep but clean through. My father had taught me wound care when I was 12 because hands should know useful things. I cleaned it with vodka because the antiseptic bottle shattered with the window. Dante did not flinch. The lighter lay on the table by his hand. "Give me that," I said. He passed it to me, silver, heavier than it looked, warm from his pocket. I sparked the flame and sterilized the needle Bianca kept in the tin for field stitches. The click sounded louder here, more intimate. "You know what happened?" I asked softly while I threaded the suture. "Yes, inside leak. Yes." I tied the first stitch. He exhaled once through his nose, the silence stretched. Then, because maybe pain weakens the walls people build, or maybe I was simply too close to think wisely, I asked, "Why me?" His gaze lifted to mine, not confused, not offended. As if he had known the question had been waiting in me from the first night and had been dreading the answer more than I had. "You want the truth?" "Yes." He looked at my hands first. At the careful way I was closing the wound, then back at my face. "When DeLuca's hand was bleeding, you knelt before you even looked at me." I stared. "In my world," he said, voice roughened by something deeper than injury, "everyone sees power first. What it can do for them, what it can do to them. You saw pain." His mouth tightened. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. The room went very still. My fingers trembled on the next stitch. Dante's thoughts, if they had been given their full shape, would have said more. That she had undone him the first moment she ignored fear long enough to comfort a bleeding man. That he had wanted her from that second and hated himself for recognizing want at all. That little thorn had lodged under his skin, so deep he was no longer sure removal was possible without damage. I tied off the last stitch. "You should rest," I whispered. He stood instead. Too close now, not touching. The kind of closeness that makes your body choose before your mind can form a vote. "Alina." The way he said my name felt like standing at the edge of something with no railing. I didn't say "I want you." I couldn't have. The truth was smaller and more frightening. "If you stop now," I said, barely breathing, "I think I'll feel it anyway." His composure broke by one visible fraction. Then he put one hand at the side of my neck, as if asking my pulse for permission, and kissed me like restraint had become pain. Slow, careful, devastating. When he drew back, his forehead rested briefly against mine. Outside, another car engine roared onto the gravel. War had arrived. His uncle arrived wearing my proof. The engine outside did not belong to Panic. Panic arrived fast, loud, crooked. This engine rolled up the gravel with the confidence of something invited, or worse, something that never needed invitation in the first place. Dante stepped back from me at once. The loss of his mouth was one kind of pain. The return of the world was another. He looked as if he had never kissed me at all. Only the roughened edge in his breathing betrayed him, and even that disappeared by the time Marco shouldered through the kitchen door with rain on his jacket and murder in his eyes. "Car at the South Drive," Marco said. 3 vehicles. Dante was already reaching for the gun on the table. "Whose?" Marco's mouth flattened. "Your uncle." The room changed shape around that word. I had heard about him in fragments over the past days, always the way people mention storms that have already taken a roof off somewhere else. Never directly, never with detail. His uncle. The consigliere, the man who had taught Dante what power required and what softness cost. Dante looked at me once, briefly, hard enough to feel. "Upstairs," he said. "I'm not. Alina." It was just my name, no title. No command sharpened for obedience. That made it worse. I went, not because I was docile. Because I had learned the difference between defiance and timing, and because the blood on his ribs had already dried through one layer of gauze. Marco led me to the upper landing overlooking the front hall. From there, I could see the great doors open below, rain-silvered light stretching over black marble. Bianca appeared at my shoulder, carrying a tray I was certain she had picked up out of sheer refusal to let men turn her house into theater uninterrupted. "If he breaks the floor again," she murmured, "I'll send him the bill. Your priorities are incredible. My priorities are the reason any of you survive the week." The man who entered beneath the chandelier did not look like a villain. That was the first disturbing thing about Vittorio Salvator. He was elegant in the way old knives are elegant. Gray at the temples, immaculate charcoal coat, gloves folded in one hand, umbrella surrendered to a guard without a glance. He wore age like another tailored item, well-fitted, expensive, concealing more than it revealed. His face was not kind, but it had practiced kindness long enough to mimic it at will. "My boy," he said to Dante, as if the bullet holes in the safe house were a minor inconvenience. "You make retirement impossible." Dante stood at the foot of the stairs, one hand in his pocket, the other loose at his side. "You came quickly. I came because you were attacked, and not because you were informed. Vittorio's smile did not fail. It simply rested. Must family make a contest of concern? No one answered. Then he turned his head slightly and the air shifted. Blue cypress. Benzoin resin, not cologne exactly, not cleanly. More like the ghost of something that had lived too long in paper fibers and expensive wool and old rooms with doors kept closed. My fingers tightened on the banister. Bianca looked at me. "What is it?" I didn't answer, because I knew that scent. It lived on the pages of my father's notebook where someone else had handled it after him. It clung to the margin with the altered clove notation. It belonged to recent touch and hidden edits. Vittorio had touched the notebook. As if he felt my stare, he glanced up. His eyes found mine at once. I had expected Dante's family resemblance to run through bone structure or coloring. It did not. Vittorio and Dante were nothing alike in face. But there it was anyway, that same stillness, that same terrifying economy of movement. Only in Vittorio it had gone wrong somewhere. Hardened. Thinned of mercy until control was all that remained. "And this," he said, looking at me as if I had been entered into discussion rather than dragged into danger, "must be Elena Belandi." I wished, absurdly, that I were wearing gloves. "Yes," Dante said before I could. Vittorio's gaze returned to him. "The perfumer's daughter." "Elena's hearing is excellent," I said. A pause. Then, to my horror, Marco coughed into his hand to hide what was almost certainly a laugh. Vittorio smiled properly this time. "Spine, good. She gets that from me," Bianca said. No one had asked Bianca. Bianca did not appear troubled by this. Vittorio stepped farther into the hall. "I hear you were hurt, Signorina. I hear your timing is excellent." Another pause, sharper. Dante did not look at me, but something in his shoulders changed by half an inch. Vittorio's voice stayed smooth. "In this family, timing is often the difference between burial and continuation. You should embroider that on a pillow," Bianca muttered. Marco made a sound like choking. Vittorio ignored them all. He was still looking at me, and now I knew why his presence made the room feel dirtier. It was not simply power. It was appetite disguised as doctrine. The kind of man who called cruelty necessity often enough that eventually other people forgot it had begun as choice. Then Dante spoke. "You've seen that I'm alive," he said. Was there anything else? There it was, not open disrespect. Worse, dismissal. Vittorio let the silence sit between them a fraction too long. "There's word Greco is missing." Marco's expression went to stone. Rafael Greco, one of Dante's captains, the same man who had been assigned East Gate rotation 2 nights earlier. The same man Leo might have meant, inside leak, and, Dante asked. "And if Greco is missing," Vittorio said mildly, "one wonders what he was afraid you'd ask him." The sentence was polished enough to sound helpful. It landed like a warning. Vittorio stayed only 6 minutes more, just enough to offer resources no one requested and concern no one trusted. Just enough to touch the back of a chair, the banister, the silver bowl by the door, as if leaving traces of himself wherever the house still pretended not to belong partly to him. When he was gone, the hall exhaled. I did not realize I had moved until I was at the bottom of the stairs and directly in front of Dante. "That scent," I said. His eyes dropped to my face. "What scent?" "Blue cypress and benzoin. It's on the notebook. On the page someone altered after my father wrote in it." Nothing in him moved. That was how I knew the blow had landed. "You're sure?" he asked. "Yes." Marco swore softly in Italian. Dante's gaze went to the open door where his uncle's car had disappeared into rain. "Then he didn't come here to protect me." "No," I said, the truth arriving cold and clean. "He came to see whether I'd recognized him." Dante's thoughts in that moment would have terrified me if I had heard them whole. He had known his uncle capable of murder for business, for leverage, for doctrine. He had not wanted to know him capable of walking into the aftermath of an attack with sympathy on his mouth and proof on his skin. He reached for the lighter in his pocket. Click! Blue flame. "Extinguished. Pack," he said to Marco without looking away from me. "We go back to Milan tonight." And just like that, whatever fragile border had existed between suspicion and war burned through. He gave me a key and called it freedom. We returned to the palazzo after midnight under armed escort and a sky the color of old bruises. No one spoke during the drive except Gianni, who spent the first 40 minutes insisting the safe house kitchen window had been his favorite window, and that losing it had felt personal. Marco told him twice to shut up. Bianca told them both they sounded like widows dividing cutlery. I sat beside Dante in the back seat with the notebook wrapped in cloth on my lap, and the taste of his kiss still haunting me like a bad decision I did not regret nearly enough. He did not touch me. He also did not let more than an inch exist between my shoulder and his. The palazzo at night felt different after the safe house, less like a fortress. More like a chessboard someone had already started bleeding on. Dante did not take me to the guest wing. He led me instead through a narrow corridor above the inner courtyard, past locked family rooms and a shuttered music salon, to a chamber tucked behind the old library. It was smaller than the rooms below, less ornate, almost private enough to seem real. A narrow bed, a desk, a wardrobe, 2 windows overlooking the stone fountain in the courtyard garden. "This was Giulia's room," he said. I turned slowly. Nothing in the room looked overtly girlish. No ribbons, no portraits, no sentimental clutter left behind for grief to worship. But there were traces. The worn spine of a French novel on the shelf, a pressed camellia inside a prayer book, a ceramic dish on the dressing table shaped like a shell. Why bring me here? Because only 4 people know this room still opens from the corridor. His voice was tired, and that frightened me more than anger would have. He crossed to the desk, unlocked the top drawer, and set 3 things in front of me with terrible precision. A key ring, a passport under a false surname, and an envelope thick with cash. I stared at them, my pulse went uneven. "What is this? A way out?" The words did not sound generous. They sounded like amputation. I looked up. "You're sending me away. I'm giving you a choice." The distinction hurt more. Outside, the courtyard fountain kept spilling water into itself with maddening calm. I could hear voices below, guards changing shift, the low murmur of men who carried weapons and believed that made them prepared for everything. "You said men outside your gates knew my name," I said. "Now men inside them do too." "Yes, and your solution is to make me disappear. My solution is to keep you breathing." I laughed once without humor. "You really do think those are the same thing?" For the first time that night, something in his composure frayed. He stepped closer, not enough to touch, enough to make the rooms smaller. "When my sister died," he said, "it happened because I believed the danger was 1 room farther away than it was. I don't repeat mistakes." The words landed between us like glass set down too hard. I looked at the shell dish on the dressing table because looking at his face would have been worse. "She used this room." "Yes. Did she play piano?" He went still. "She played badly, loudly." "On purpose?" I smiled despite myself. His mouth shifted by the smallest degree, the memory catching at him somewhere not yet scarred flat. Then he set something else on the desk. The silver lighter. "You'll know if I'm lying to you now," he said. I frowned. "What?" He opened it. Click, blue flame lifting clean and small. "Heat," he said. "You said scent reveals intent. Your father used structure as code. What if he used fixatives as hidden ink?" I stared at the flame, then at him. "You thought of that. I'm not only decorative little thorn." My heart did something humiliating. I took the notebook from the bed, turned to the altered page, and held a sheet at careful distance over the flame. Not enough to burn, just warm. Resin scent rose first, then something bitter and medicinal underneath. Slowly, faint lines browned into visibility between the formula entries. Not ink, oil, names, 3 shipping dates. 2 account numbers, and beneath them in my father's hand, 1 sentence so small I almost missed it. "Vittorio knows about the fire." I stopped breathing. Dante saw the change in my face and took the page from me. His eyes scanned once. Then nothing in him moved at all. That frightened me enough to put a hand on his wrist. Only then did I realize I had done it. His gaze dropped to my fingers. The room changed. Outside, someone shouted a gate command. A dog barked in the lower yard. Somewhere distant, Gianni was probably complaining about the quality of post-midnight coffee. Inside this room, every sound seemed to step carefully around the fact that my hand was on Dante's skin and neither of us had yet made it stop. "He knew," I whispered. Dante looked back at the page. "Yes, he let you believe. Yes. I let go because if I didn't, I would do something less survivable. What happened that night?" I asked. His jaw tightened once. Then he answered, because at last there was no clean way left to avoid it. "There was a warehouse on the riverfront," he said. "Officially textiles. Unofficially, several other things my father pretended not to understand. Giulia went there to meet someone. I was supposed to pick her up." His voice stayed controlled. Only the control had begun to cost him visibly. "The building caught fire before I arrived." I thought of the sentence on the page. Vittorio knows about the fire. "Was it an accident?" "No." The word entered the room and stayed. I looked at the desk again, the key ring, the passport, the envelope. "And now," Dante said, "you decide whether you want to leave before I tear my family open." I should have answered then. Instead, I looked out the window at the courtyard, at the black water of the fountain, at the square of night above the stone walls. Freedom sat on the desk between us wearing a false name. And for the first time in my life, I understood that leaving and escaping were not the same thing. My brother came smelling of gasoline and fear. Leo chose the old botanical conservatory outside Porta Venezia because even in winter it pretended at softness. Glass roof, iron ribs, dead vines sleeping along the beams. The kind of place where people once came to admire delicate things under careful temperature control. Now it smelled of wet soil, rust, and the faint animal panic of a meeting no one trusted. I had told Dante about the message. That was the difference between the girl who took Leo's call in Chapter 5 and the woman who stepped from the black car now with a wire of fear in her spine and no intention of handling betrayal. Alone. Marco and 2 men took the perimeter. Gianni stayed with the driver and announced he hated plants because they encouraged insects and false hope. Dante walked beside me through the center aisle beneath the moon-pale roof, one hand loose at his side, coat unbuttoned, every step quiet enough to feel predatory. "He said come alone," I murmured. "He can be disappointed. I'm serious." So am I. At the far end of the conservatory, a figure emerged between dormant citrus tubs and stripped rose standards. Leo. For 1 second I saw only my brother. The line of his shoulders I had known since childhood. The dark hair that never stayed combed. The restless mouth inherited from our mother. Then he stepped into better light and the rest hit at once. Split lip, yellowing bruise at the jaw, dried blood on one cuff, the stale sourness of fear soaked through old wool. And gasoline. Not on his clothes, in them, worked into the fibers like memory. I started toward him before I could stop myself. Dante's hand closed around my forearm, not hard, final. "Wait!" "Leo," I called. My brother's eyes found me and went briefly bright with shame. "Elle." No one had called me that in days. The sound of it nearly undid me. "What did you do?" I asked softly. He laughed once, broken. "You always go straight for the wound." "Answer me." He dragged a hand over his mouth. "I took pages from Papa's notebook, not the whole thing, just enough to sell. I thought they were formulas. Then Greco saw what I had, and after that everybody wanted a copy." Dante went very still beside me. "Greco works for my uncle." Leo's gaze flicked to him. "Greco works for money." Marco, somewhere to our left behind a pillar, swore under his breath. I took one step forward. Dante let me this time. "Leo, why does Vittorio care about Papa's notes?" My brother looked at me with the expression people wear when they realize the worst truth in the room belongs to them partly for having touched it. "Because your father saw something after the fire," he said, "and because he wrote it down instead of dying fast enough for them." The conservatory seemed to tilt. "What did he see?" Leo swallowed. Vittorio locked the warehouse doors. No one moved. Glass ticked overhead as the temperature dropped outside. Dante's voice, when it came, was so quiet it made my skin rise. "Say that again." Leo's face had gone gray. He locked the side exits. Giulia was still inside. Papa got there with one of the drivers. He tried to go in, said he heard a girl screaming upstairs. Vittorio stopped him. His eyes were on me, not Dante, because cowardice is sometimes just love choosing the weaker witness. Papa told me once, when he'd had too much wine, that some men survive their souls by calling it duty. Dante did not blink. I could hear my own heartbeat. Hear rain beginning somewhere beyond the glass. Hear the faint, dry shift of Marco moving position. Then Dante said, "What else?" Leo took something from inside his coat, not a gun. A folded page, oil-stained and creased nearly white at the corners. "I took this before Greco took the rest." I reached for it. The first shot shattered the glass above us. Everything became motion. Dante hit me low around the waist and drove me behind an iron planter as glass rained down like ice. Marco opened fire from the left flank. Someone shouted. Leo disappeared in the noise. "Stay down," Dante said. "You say that so often it's becoming a personality trait." He almost looked at me, almost. Then another man broke cover near the central aisle and Dante fired once. Clean. Immediate. The man dropped among overturned pots and black dirt. I saw Greco then, not clearly, just enough. Dark coat, broad frame, gun in hand, running toward the side exit with Leo by the collar. "Leo," I screamed. Greco swung the gun toward sound. I didn't think. My hand found the sample atomizer in my coat pocket, the black resin accord I had built from the coated line. High alcohol. Pepper note, smoke. I surged up and sprayed it full into his face. He shouted, stumbled, fired wild. Dante moved so fast he seemed to appear rather than cross distance. Greco hit the ground under the force of him. Leo tore free and dropped to his knees, coughing. The whole thing lasted seconds. It felt like a year and a half. By the time Marco reached them, Greco was alive, disarmed, and looking at Dante with the first real fear I had ever seen in a grown man who carried a gun professionally. "You sold my house," Dante said. Greco spat blood. "Your uncle built it." And there it was. The line none of them had said aloud until now. Leo crawled toward me, shaking. I caught his face in both hands like I could hold him together by sheer irritation. "You absolute idiot," I whispered. He nodded against my palm. "Fair." Dante stood over Greco with murder in the shape of patience. Then he bent, took the folded page from Leo's hand, and passed it to me without looking away from the man at his feet. "Read." I opened it with trembling fingers. It was another formula page, but the code was obvious now. Orange blossom, smoke, resin, cedar. And in the margin, one sentence in my father's hand, written harder than the others, as if the pen itself had been frightened. She did not die in the fire. She died because the door was barred. I made a sound I did not recognize. Dante heard it. He looked at me then, and the expression on his face was worse than rage. Rage was simple. This was grief finally discovering where to aim. He told me how his sister died. Greco lived long enough to be useful. That was Marco's phrasing, not mine. But by dawn the house understood the distinction between captured and safe well enough that no one argued over vocabulary. Greco was taken to the lower rooms. Leo was put in the east guest wing under guard, patched up, fed broth by Bianca, and insulted into temporary honesty. Gianni announced that if one more person bled on antique flooring, he was filing a workplace complaint. I sat in the archive room with Dante and my father's notebook, spread open under the circle of green-shaded lamplight. The world below us was moving toward violence with professional efficiency. Calls, cars, men arriving through the service gate, weapons being checked in rooms that smelled of dust and iron and old paper. Up here, time felt stranger, slower, more exact. Dante stood at the far end of the table, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled, the bandage at his ribs replaced cleanly this time. He looked like a man who had stopped sleeping years ago and only now discovered the bill had come due. "Show me," he said. I turned the page we had recovered from Leo and aligned it beside the original formula sequence. Heated one, then the other over the silver lighter until hidden oil script breathed into view. Scent came first each time, the sharp sweetness of orange blossom curdling into smoke. "My father layered testimony," I said. "A formula to hide inventory, then another to hide witness notes. If one page was taken alone, it looked meaningless. And together," I looked at him, "together it becomes a ledger of the fire." His throat moved once. I read slowly, translating the code into plain language as I went. Dates, a warehouse lot number, purchase orders for accelerant disguised as resin shipments. A payment routed through a shell company Vittorio controlled through a cousin in Lugano. Then, the lines my father had written in the margins after the official entries ended. "Girl upstairs." Door chained from outside. Vittorio said, "Leave it, D not there yet." The room went very quiet. I did not read the next line right away because I knew, even before I spoke it, that it would divide Dante's life into the version he had survived, until now, and the version he would have to live after hearing it. He understood anyway. "Continue." My voice barely held steady. "Giulia struck the window 3 times. Dante closed his eyes, not long, just once. Just enough for the human being under the title, and the suit, and the command to show me the wound exactly where it lived. When he opened them again, they were darker. "He told me she died before the roof went," he said. "My father says otherwise. He told me there was no way in." I swallowed. "My father tried." Dante laughed then, one terrible short sound with no humor in it at all. "Yes, that sounds like Matteo Belandi." I looked down at the notebook. "You knew him better than you said. He made my sister a rose and ink perfume when she was 16 because she thought all proper ladies smelled boring." The corner of Dante's mouth shifted and failed. "She adored him." I closed my eyes briefly. My father, his careful hands, his maddening patience. The way he smelled blotters before dinner, as if conversation with scent were often easier than conversation with people. He had died in an accident on a mountain road 1 year after the warehouse fire. Not an accident, a silencing. "I thought he stayed in our world," I whispered. "Small clients, weddings, private commissions. I thought the worst thing men wanted from perfume was seduction." "In my family," Dante said, "everything useful becomes a weapon." I looked at him then. "Not everything." His gaze held mine for 1 beat too long. Then he reached into his pocket and laid the passport and keys on the table again. I stared at them. "I told Marco to prep a car," he said. "At sunrise it can take you to the border or to Florence or to a convent if you suddenly find religion. I don't care where. You take Leo if you want him. The accounts in the envelope will hold. And you, I stay, to kill him, to end him." His voice remained level. "If killing becomes necessary along the way, that is a separate grammar problem." It was so coldly phrased I almost smiled. Almost. "You said this was my choice," I said. "It is. You want me gone." He looked at the hidden lines on the page, not at me. "I want one thing in this house not to become ash because it stayed too near me." For a moment I couldn't speak. Then I picked up the key ring. His jaw tightened. I walked to the door, opened it. Stood there with freedom cold in my palm, and the corridor stretching ahead into a life where I could survive this story by leaving it. Then I looked back. Dante had not moved. That was his brutality. He would not beg, he would bleed before he begged. I crossed the room again, set the keys down beside the lighter. "No," I said. Something in his face changed. Barely, entirely. "You don't understand what happens next," he said quietly. "I understand enough." My pulse was all over the place, but my voice held. "My father died because he wrote the truth down and no one finished reading it. Your sister died because men confused obedience with duty. My brother is an idiot, but he is my idiot, and he nearly got himself killed touching what should have come to me in the first place." I stepped closer. "So no, Dante." I'm not leaving while your uncle is still breathing over my father's pages. The air between us went charged and still. You choose this now, he said. Yes, in the open. Yes. The word seemed to land somewhere very deep in him. His thoughts, if they had been given voice then, would not have sounded like triumph. They would have sounded like terror sharpened by gratitude. He had offered her a gate and watched her turn back toward the fire by choice. Men like Dante did not trust gifts. They trusted decisions made against self-interest. I put my hand over the notebook. Tell me how to end him, I said. And for the first time, he did not answer me like I was something to protect from the shape of his world. He answered me like I was in it. I walked back in wearing my choice. The Salvator Winter Foundation Ball had been scheduled for months, which in our favor meant Vittorio could not cancel it without looking afraid. So naturally, we gave him no reason to think we were anything but grieving, elegant, and one step behind. By 7 in the evening, the palazzo glittered. Candles in the long gallery. Quartet in the music room. White roses and black ribbon across the donor tables in tasteful sorrow for recent security concerns, which was how rich families described attempted murder when other rich families were watching. Women arrived in silk and diamonds. Men arrived in polished shoes and expensive caution. I arrived in silver. Bianca had chosen the dress with the focus of a general selecting artillery. Liquid pale silk, long sleeves, modest neckline, a slit only visible when I walked. If you're going to ruin a powerful man publicly, she told me while fastening the back, you should do it looking unforgettable. Gianni, in formal black, pressed a hand to his heart when he saw me. If anyone shoots tonight, it should at least be with aesthetic appreciation. Bianca smacked his shoulder. Stop breathing on the girl. The workroom table upstairs still smelled of what I had made there in secret over the last 9 hours. Not perfume exactly. Proof. I had rebuilt the altered formula from my father's notebook and then changed it. Not enough to lose the signature, just enough to make it bloom under heat. Blue cypress, benzoin, clove. A skin-fixative base, difficult to wash fully from fabric and impossible to hide once activated by flame. Vittorio had handled the notebook. Tonight I would make the rooms smell it. Dante met me at the foot of the main staircase. Black tuxedo, white shirt, no visible weapon, which only meant he had chosen better hiding places. His eyes found me and stayed. The rest of the ballroom receded to candlelight and blurred sound for one dangerous second. You should not look at me like that, I murmured. Then stop giving me reasons. My heart misbehaved. He offered his arm. I took it. The room noticed. There are silences made of absence and silences made of attention. This one rippled outward under chandeliers as we entered together. I could feel it move from table to table, guest to guest, gossip rewriting itself in real time. At the far end of the room, Vittorio watched us over the rim of a champagne glass. His expression did not change. That was his first mistake of the evening. Men who feel nothing are easier to fear than men who feel too much. Tonight, in a room built on family optics and donor vanity, he should have pretended surprise, warmth, anything. Instead, he looked like a man mentally measuring coffin wood. Smile, Dante said softly. Why? Because it annoys him. So I did. The orchestra shifted into a waltz no one was really listening to. Speeches began. A priest blessed generosity. A banker thanked heritage. Gianni circulated with trays and gossip. Bianca supervised service with the terrifying serenity of a woman who had decided years ago that God would sort everyone else out eventually, and meanwhile someone had to manage the fish course. At 9:12, Dante gave the smallest nod. I moved. The donor gift table stood beneath a bank of mirrors in the gallery. Crystal scent vials arranged among roses, each labeled as a commemorative fragrance from the Belandi workshop in honor of Salvator philanthropy. Orange blossom on top, smoke beneath. Innocence above evidence, the sort of structure my father would have appreciated bitterly. Signorina Belandi, Vittorio said behind me. I turned. He smiled with just enough gentleness to insult the word. A beautiful tribute, My father taught me that memory should linger. Wise man. He was. He came closer to inspect the vials. There it was again, that scent, controlled and expensive and wrong. Blue cypress threaded with resin, cleaner tonight under formal cologne but unmistakable to me now. I lifted one vial. Would you do me the honor? His brows rose. The first presentation, I said, as family. Dante had moved nearer behind the crowd without seeming to. Marco was now by the west doors. Leo, cleaned up and white around the mouth, stood half-shadowed beside Bianca, who kept one hand like a claw on his sleeve as if she anticipated stupidity and planned to interrupt it bodily. Vittorio took the vial. I handed him a blotter. He uncapped it. Nothing dramatic happened at first. Just orange blossom, soft and expensive, a civilized sweetness over the gallery. A few guests turned approvingly. A woman near the mirrors asked what the top note was. Then Dante stepped beside his uncle. He took out the silver lighter and clicked it open beneath the blotter in Vittorio's hand. Heat lifted the base. The scent changed all at once. The gallery filled with the darker accord, blue cypress, benzoin, clove, smoke. Not a room fragrance. A fingerprint. The exact ghost that lived on the altered pages of my father's notebook. I spoke before anyone else could. That is the scent left on Matteo Belandi's ledger after someone added to it following the warehouse fire, I said clearly. The same person who handled the payment entries, altered the shipping marks, and suppressed witness notes. Silence hit hard. Vittorio looked first at the blotter in his hand, then at me, then at Dante. Careful, he said mildly. Accusations are vulgar when unsupported. Leo stepped forward then, shaking so badly I thought his knees might fail. He paid Greco, my brother said. Through Carmina Logistics and the Lugano accounts. I saw the transfers. I copied one before they took my phone. Marco produced the printouts like a priest producing relics. Dante never took his eyes off his uncle. My sister struck the window 3 times, he said. Nothing in the room breathed. Vittorio set the vial down. At last, his face changed, not into guilt. Men like him rarely gifted others something so clean. It changed into contempt. The effort of gentleness dropped because usefulness had ended. She was weak, he said. The sentence seemed to split the gallery down the middle. Several women gasped. Someone dropped a glass. Dante went still in a way I had learned to fear. Vittorio looked around the room as if he were the only adult at a childish banquet. Your father built an empire with sentiment caged. You would have lost it for a girl and a soft-hearted tradesman with notebooks. My father died because he wouldn't help you bury murder, I said. Vittorio's gaze cut to me. Your father died because he mistook conscience for leverage. He reached toward my wrist. Dante moved before contact landed. He caught his uncle's hand midair with enough force to make bone sound inside skin. Touch her, Dante said softly, and I'll remove the hand. No one in the gallery would ever forget the quiet in his voice. Neither would I then the west doors burst open. Gunfire cracked across crystal and mirrors, and the ball became a battlefield. He opened them, and I stayed anyway. Chaos in a ballroom is uglier than chaos on a street. There is too much glass. Too much silk. Too much money trying not to understand blood once it appears. Guests dropped behind overturned tables. Candles went out in bursts of black smoke. The quartet vanished with admirable speed. Gianni tackled a donor's son to the marble and shouted, "This is not the dramatic attention you think you want." Marco's men returned fire from the gallery arches. Vittorio did not run immediately. That was the thing about true believers in their own cruelty. They always assume one more speech is possible. He had pulled a second gun from somewhere inside his jacket, while everyone else flinched at the first volley. He backed toward the service corridor with 2 of his men and Leo in his line of sight. "Elena," Leo shouted. I turned instinctively. Vittorio's man caught me by the arm. Dante's expression changed. Not louder, not wilder, colder. The man got exactly 1 second of existence, with his hand on me before Dante crossed the space between us, and put him through the mirrored panel hard enough to turn reflected candlelight into rain. "Move," Dante said to me. I did. That was how we ended up in the service passage behind the ballroom. Me with the notebook pressed under one arm, Dante ahead of me with his gun drawn, Marco flanking left. Leo stumbling somewhere behind Bianca, who had acquired a fireplace poker and looked spiritually prepared to use it. Vittorio was heading for the river warehouse. I knew it before anyone said it because men like him circle their own myths when cornered. They return to the site of the first successful cruelty and mistake repetition for control. "The East Gate," Dante snapped. "He'll cut toward the river." We were in the cars 30 seconds later. Milan at night streaked past in sodium gold and wet black. My pulse beat high and hard. The notebook dug against my ribs through silk and fear. Dante drove the lead car himself because apparently near patricide was not an event he delegated. At the warehouse district, the air changed. River cold, rust, oil, old ash sleeping in brick. The building at the end of the lane stood half abandoned, rebuilt after the fire and never fully trusted again. One upper window had been boarded. Another reflected the river like a blind eye. "He'd come here," I whispered. Dante did not ask how I knew. Inside, the warehouse smelled wrong at once. Fresh accelerant laid over ancient burn. My father had taught me that fire has generations of scent. The first is violence. The second is memory. The third is what people use to imitate the first when they need a story repeated. "He's going to burn it again," I said. Dante looked at Marco. "Get the men around back, kill the power." Marco vanished into darkness with 2 shooters. Dante turned to me. "You stay with the car." "No, Elena, no." I stepped closer, silk hem catching on damp concrete. "If he's laid accelerant, I can track the line before you walk into it blind." His jaw worked once. "This is not your fight." I held up the notebook. "It has my father's name in it." That did it. He exhaled once, short, defeated by truth. "Stay behind me." We went in through the side loading door. The interior was cavernous, darker than memory, iron rafters high overhead. My sandals slipped once on grit and old soot. Somewhere above us, a board creaked. Somewhere ahead, a man laughed softly. "Dante." Vittorio's voice carried beautifully in empty spaces. Of course it did. He had probably practiced it. He stood on the far catwalk above the main floor, gun in hand, coat open, 2 remaining men bracketing the stairwell. A lantern burned beside him, throwing gold against rust and shadow. "You always did come late to family tragedies," he said. Dante stepped into the open. I nearly stopped breathing. "Let her go," he said. Vittorio smiled. "I haven't taken her." No, he hadn't. Not physically. That was the precise horror of men like him. They preferred to claim they merely arranged the conditions in which everyone else's choices became useless. "You killed Giulia," Dante said. "I preserved what your father built. You barred the door. I barred weakness." The words rang through the warehouse. I felt Dante change beside me. Not lose control. Finish with it. Then Leo, from somewhere behind a stack of crates to our right, shouted, "Elena!" My idiot brother had not stayed in the car either. One of Vittorio's men swung toward the sound. I reacted before thought. The sample atomizer in my dress pocket hit my palm. I sprayed the man's face. He shouted, stumbled, fired high. Marco's shot took him a second later from the back stair rail. Everything broke at once. Gunfire, shouting. Lantern kicked over, glass shattering on iron. Vittorio fired at Dante. Dante fired back. The lantern flame found the laid accelerant line, and suddenly fire ran across the warehouse floor in bright, hungry veins. Not again, I thought wildly. Not this room, not this family, not this ending. Smoke rolled low. Vittorio backed toward the upper office with murder and disbelief fighting in his face. Dante went after him up the steel stairs. I followed because I had exhausted the part of myself that respected instructions hours ago. In the office above the floor, firelight licked the windows red. Vittorio had Dante at gunpoint by the time I reached the doorway. "Still choosing her," he said, breathing hard. "Even now." Dante did not look away from him. I'm choosing what you never understood. Love is leverage. No, Dante said. Love is the thing that makes men like you afraid. Vittorio's mouth twisted. He fired. I screamed. Dante moved. The bullet took glass instead of flesh as he drove forward. The two of them hit the desk together, guns skidding across charred floorboards. They crashed into the far cabinet. Wood split. Smoke thickened. Then Vittorio saw me. Of all the stupid, brave things I have done in my life, stepping toward a man who had burned a girl alive ranks embarrassingly high. I held up the notebook. You wanted this more than truth, I said, and you still lost both. His eyes flicked to it. That was enough. Dante hit him hard in the ribs and sent him backward into the broken office window frame. For one terrible second, Vittorio hung there against firelight and smoke, still looking astonished that the world had denied him continuation. Then the frame gave. He fell through into the burning dark below. Silence lasted less than a heartbeat. Then the office ceiling groaned. Dante, I said. He had gone still, not with shock, with memory. The wrong room, the wrong fire, the same scream echoing where only he could hear it. I crossed the space, caught his face in both hands and forced him to look at me. Not this time, I said. Do you hear me? Not this time. His eyes found mine, came back. Together we ran. Marco and Leo dragged us clear just as part of the upper office collapsed inward in a rush of sparks and black smoke. Sirens were beginning somewhere distant, late and useless as always. On the riverbank, with fire painting the water orange, Dante bent over with his hands on his knees and coughed soot into the night. I stood beside him in a ruined silver dress, clutching a half-burned notebook and shaking hard enough to feel my teeth. Leo, bloody and alive, sat on a crate while Bianca, who had somehow arrived in a second car with a blanket and the expression of a saint prepared to sue everyone, inspected him for damage. Gianni appeared 2 minutes later, looked at the inferno and said, I leave one ballroom for 6 minutes and you all reinvent apocalypse. I laughed so hard it hurt. Maybe that was shock. Maybe it was survival. Often they wear the same coat. Dawn found us back at the palazzo. The gate stood open, not figuratively, literally. Black iron spread wide to the paling city as men carried evidence boxes to waiting lawyers and police friends who understood which truths would be permitted to live now, that the right man had fallen. Dante met me in the courtyard by the fountain where the first light made the stone look almost soft. The car is ready if you want it, he said. No force, no command, no locked wing, just choice. The envelope waited on the fountain ledge beside the keys. I looked at them, then at the open gates, then at him. My foot still ached sometimes where glass had cut it that first night. My father was still dead. Giulia was still gone. Nothing clean could be made of any of that. But truth had finally been read out loud, and the man standing in front of me had opened every gate he knew how to open without asking to be rewarded for it. So I crossed the courtyard instead of the threshold, stopped directly in front of him, and put the keys back in his hand. I told you already, I said softly. I'm not leaving while danger knows my name. His gaze lowered to my mouth, then rose again. It will, he said, for the rest of your life. I stepped closer. Then it can learn my address. The sound he made was almost a laugh and almost surrender. He touched my face with one hand as if confirming I had, in fact, chosen the impossible thing in daylight. Then his thumb brushed once just below my lower lip, and I knew with a certainty that frightened me less now that all the tenderness hidden inside threat had not been imagined. He took out the silver lighter, clicked it open. Blue flame, closed it again. My little thorn, he said quietly. And when he kissed me in the open courtyard with the gates unbarred behind me, I stayed because I wanted to. Not because I had nowhere else to go. But because at last, with the morning coming in over stone and water and smoke, I knew exactly where I had chosen to be.